Yeah, I think going without facial hair was a mistake, folks.
They will begin to salivate heavily, have severe muscle tremors, fall to their knees, and then collapse. The inability to control the muscles will not allow myelin to rise. Their drops of saliva become almost by drooling and excessive salivation. These are characteristic of initial symptoms of GP poisoning.
Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. As always, I'm your host, Patrick. It's good to be back. Back in the saddle with one more update on 2023 releases. I'm a little behind now. I think everybody's kind of moved past the 2023 lists, but I promised myself that I'd get this done, and I mentioned that I was going to do this last update when I talked about black and death metal releases of 2023. We can put this puppy to bed after this, but I really wanted to mention a few other odds and ends. I'll title this the rest of 2023. There were a couple of records that were so squarely between hardcore punk and metal, I didn't feel like they really belonged in either category because they kicked so much butt at both. And so I want to talk about those two records, two of my favorite albums of the year too. And I'll rank all them in an Instagram post or maybe a short or something in a day or two. A reel or whatever. Not a TikTok. I don't have TikTok. And also three albums that kind of came from the punk scene, but involved a little bit more like kind of post-punk influence and stuff like that, that I felt kind of deserved their own category. So 5 records of 2023, and then I'm going to talk about reissues, inspired by Eric Bauer's update from about a week ago. He talked about a bunch of great reissues, a few of those Russian metal reissues on Nuclear War Now, as well as a bunch of black metal stuff, some cool South American black metal. And I thought it would be cool to talk about my picks for reissues because, like Eric, I've been around the block. I love seeing older bands unearthed and given new life, having a caring label breathe life back into an old release and bringing it up for a younger audience. Maybe something was prohibitively expensive because it was so obscure and now you can get your hands on it, stuff like that. I love hearing old stuff for the first time or getting better versions of it or non-bootleg quality versions of it. So I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. I got a little bit over my head with the reissue stuff. I grabbed a bunch of records that I bought this year, a few pretty recently. There's a handful as well that are not exactly reissues of entire albums, but rather compilations of previous recordings. I'm just going to count those as well. It's a bad count. It's fine. Let's not go crazy with getting nitpicky about this kind of stuff. So let's talk about my last 5 favorite records that came out in 2023. And some of these are way, way up there. As a matter of fact, spoiler alert, if I had to pick an album of the year, and I'll sift this through in my brain when I put the top 10 up there, it's probably going to be Sarin Reaper, Noxious Black Vomit. This came out on Dirtbag Distro this year on cassette, and then it got reissued on vinyl on a different label that I can't remember. I am going to get that album in the mail this week. Hopefully, I just ordered it. Definitely one of those ones that's worth buying on several formats. Nice vinyl copy to keep, as well as the tape. This band is from Kansas City. They are incredibly, incredibly ugly music. And that's the best way to just describe them. You get so much when you listen to this. There's such a ranging palette of just disgusting hatred on this. There's a lot of tonal similarities somewhat to like sludge bands. Like I think of like I Hate God at their ugliest, but they're not a slow band. They do delve into and plunge into kind of slower moments and heavier moments here and there, but there's also elements of D-beat, elements of grind, elements of crust, a couple of different vocal approaches. They do the big dog, little dog kind of thing, but there's more screechy, dirtbag, almost bordering on black metal style vocals as opposed to growls, but there are like some pretty disgusting growls too. Guitar-wise, they remind me more sometimes of punk bands than they do of metal bands, and I think that's what's so interesting. There's plenty of leads on it, but it's not like metal shredding. A lot of it kind of reminds me of Greg Ginn's work on... not when Black Flag got too crazy and too weird, like later on, but maybe mid-period Black Flag, like Damaged and My War and stuff like that. The out-of-control soloing kind of reminds me of the very first Corrosion of Conformity record too. Just loose enough to be kind of crazy sounding, you know. Really, really thick, commanding, deep, slightly distorted bass tone, and just a great wide range of all the songs having their own personalities, wide range of sounds and tonal shifts and stuff like that. Very, very good. They also cover War Machine by Anti-Cymex, make it their own, speed it up a bunch. Just all in all, a great release. Probably my favorite of the year. And really surprised me, because I like their tape. I had their tape from a year or two ago. But this completely blew me out of the water. I was not expecting something so accomplished and so great from this band. So definitely check that band out if you haven't. Sarin Reaper from Kansas City. Then, to just kind of couple together the two metallic punk bands, if you will. This was number one with a lot of people. I saw that were more so into punk. But this is a very metal-sounding band. This is Zorn from Philadelphia, and this is their self-titled record that came out on Sorry State and Furo Records. I was able to catch these guys at a DIY venue that was pretty much a storefront in downtown Raleigh, and they blew me away. Super intense. I think they were all shirtless, wearing vests with like a simplistic eye black, like corpse paint. Musically, it's metallic punk with a very strong kind of black metal leaning to it. You could say first wave if you wanted to. Very raw, but held together very, very well, very tightly played. There's a certain kind of effect on the guitar that I can't place. It's like some sort of delay or maybe flange or something like that makes everything sound really molten. They do mix it up a little bit. There's a little bit of kind of chunky thrash metal in there, here and there. You can certainly hear how maybe the influence of some UK metal punk is kind of seeping through, namely Broken Bones, and specifically Forward Into Battle era English Dogs a bit. I mean, Scandinavian hardcore, raw black metal, kind of all thrown in the mix there. A little bit of D-beat, very fast, just very acidic sounding and molten sounding metallic punk from Philadelphia. Zorn, great record too. Great songcraft as well. All the songs are discernible from each other. Singer was brought out in a coffin. That was fun. Okay, so now I'll get into the punker side of things, or the less metal side of things, I should say. Talk a little bit about Poison Ruin. This came out on Relapse this year. This band is also from Philly. You may have heard of these folks. I mean, it's a Relapse release, so it's probably pretty well known. I'm assuming it's probably on some lists that have popped up here and there for 2023. This is a great record, really expanding on their original concept and their original sound from their earlier recordings from the past year or two. And it's such a cool concept that they're approaching. They have this sort of Knights Templar thing that was sort of a trope in Oi for a long time with, of course, the Templars and some other bands, with these knights on the cover, but then utilizing like peace symbols and yin-yangs and stuff like that. Musically combining the coldness of a lot of post-punk with dungeon synth intros and outros and instrumentals, and then like a straightforward kind of punk approach rhythmically. It's just everything surrounding it, the atmosphere and the recording and everything feels weirdly otherworldly and soundtracky, although purely on a musical basis, it's like straightforward street punkish kind of stuff a lot of the time, or even approaching Oi in some cases. The vocals are gruff. I noticed the vocalist is going for something a little bit meaner sounding than the past recordings, something approaching kind of Lemmy territory, but the delivery is still somehow really cold, and it just feels like a soundtrack to some Swords and Sorcery movie that I've never seen, even though most of it isn't very score-like. It's punk rock. It just feels like the soundtrack to Battle. You know, it's really, really cool. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I ended up spinning it very, very often at work. It was kind of pushing the threshold of what I could get away with at work, but I did it anyway. Yeah, Harvest by Poison Ruin. Final Gasp, Morning Moon. Came out on Relapse this year. Yeah, I had no idea that... I know that these folks put out some stuff on Triple B, and I knew that they were touring a lot. I didn't hear anything about them being on Relapse. I can't keep track of everything all at once, and it's been 2023 has been a hectic, wild year for me, let me tell you. But this, I was extremely happy to find out that they had signed to Relapse, and they put out this killer record. My friend Peter plays on this. Years and years ago, if you've been watching my channel for some time now, it must have been 3 or 4 years ago now, I didn't have many guests. I had my wife on once, my friend John, who was my neighbor, and my friend Peter, who plays in this band, and we did like a fun, we made a saw blade that was like a Wheel of Fortune thing with different tapes on it, and randomly spun them and listened to it and talked about it. It's the Wheel of Civil Discourse, we called it. But if you remember that episode, Peter from that episode is the guitarist in this band, and I couldn't be happier for him. I did see that he was touring a lot via social media and Instagram and everything like that, and it's well-deserved. This band originally started as sort of a heavy nod to Samhain and maybe some Danzig stuff, maybe the darker Misfits stuff. Very, Danzig and Danzig-related products kind of style band. They're expanded beyond that. You can certainly hear those influences. You can hear those vocal inflections with the way the singer sings. You can hear that kind of stuff going on. But there's a cold, very Killing Joke kind of influence creeping in, sort of a tribal kind of mechanical early Killing Joke kind of vibe. Maybe some other kind of death rock and post-punk influences weaving their way into just something outside of mid-period Danzig, Samhain, worship kind of stuff. It's very good. It's very catchy. Extremely well-produced, which I think is the right move, because trying to pull off that odd, not-so-great production from those Samhain records seems like it might be impossible, and I'm glad they just went with doing what felt natural and what captured what is now forming to be their sound. I think that's a good move. So yeah, check that out if you like those bands I mentioned. Let's get this shrink off. It's satisfying. A little ASMR here. ASMR. This is a band I kept hearing about a lot. Homefront Games of Power. This is a Canadian band, and I heard that they were kind of punk, kind of oi, and kind of post-punk too. They're way more post-punk. There's a lot of New Order in this. A lot of the once maligned but now seemingly loved Blitz second album, Second Empire Justice, which is a very big about face from their street punk stuff. It kind of melds the Blitz stuff from that record to something a little bit more accessible and a little bit more towards straightforward punk. There's a few pretty aggro songs on this, but it's very dancey and very synthy. It's just got a lot of street punk oi kind of attitude underneath it and that kind of tempo, and it is so catchy. It's really, really good. I'd recommend it to people who like everything from Depeche Mode and New Order right through to Blitz and Cockspur. And it seems like it's getting a lot of traction. It's been on fire, gaining a lot of popularity with good reason. Came out on La Vida es un Muse, who put out a lot of good stuff. It's just like these two fellows here. I think they're from, I want to say Alberta, but I'm not 100% on that. I know they're Canadian though. Great stuff. Synth-oi. Somebody said oi gaze, which is kind of fun. I didn't really hear any slow dive in it or anything like that though, but then again, I haven't listened to slow dive in ages, so who knows. Yeah, so that's all the 2023 new stuff, recent albums that came out this year. Let's talk about some reissues. Here's a good one. I was really stoked, really stoked to see this reissued. I have it on a bunch of different compilations of all their other material. I think there's 3 different Heresy compilation CDs that span all of their releases over the 4 or 5 years that they were around. But if you didn't know, Heresy were really instrumental in influencing extreme metal without being an extreme metal band. They were a hardcore band that played in the UK, took a lot of nods from fast Boston stuff, from DRI. They kind of preceded Power Violence and stuff like that. One of the first bands to really utilize blast beats like hyper fast blast beats. They were friends with and competitors with Napalm Death for how fast they could play at old venues like the Mermaid in Nottingham and stuff. Big influence on extreme metal, one of those hardcore influences that certainly bands like Bolt Thrower and Napalm Death and all those guys were into. Later on, they started to involve even more American influence, covering Youth of Today and having almost like more of a posy vocal style, like kind of more melodic 7 seconds kind of vocal style. On their early stuff, you can hear the influence from the American bands, especially the really fast ones, but there's a lot of discharge and a lot of like just abrasive bomb blast kind of stuff going on. This is a great example of that, the Never Healed EP. This was originally a flexi, so it's cool to see it in a non-flexi form. This was reissued by Short Fuse Records, which is a British label. It's got a nice insert, poster, collage, punk collage style there. Small enough for me to unfurl, so why not? That's nice, that looks good. Also, it's like a Polaroid-sized thing, little picture of them playing. Yeah, they threw in an extra foldable cover. Maybe they intended this to be the cover of it and just decided to redo it or something. But nice little bonus. Oh, I should mention, I'll do this without unfolding this again. This guy wearing the homemade shirt that said Kronos is a wimp. Kind of funny. When a lot of black metal nerds bash on Venom, it bothers me. I don't like it. Venom coined the term, show some respect. But when hardcore punk dudes make fun of Venom, like this guy and the Amoebics dude making fun of Venom, it's funny. It's funny to me. Then, this is cool. This is one of those cult bands that I heard about a bunch growing up in upstate New York. And recently I heard mention of them several times on one of my favorite podcasts, First 7-Inch Club. A couple of guys, one from Albany, one that lived in Albany a long time and doesn't anymore. They talk about old Albany scene stuff. This was a grindcore band that was around in Albany from 95 to 97, not very long, did a small batch of recordings, grindcore band called Exploding Corpse Action. And this is just their collected works. They did a demo, I think a split with a band called Dead Baby, that shared members with them, I believe. And then this unreleased session that's, I think, the entirety of Side A, which is killer. The Subsonic Torture EP. That was previously unreleased. Then the split, and then on the other side, the demo, and then some live tracks. And the live tracks sound pretty good, too. It's monstrous death metal, grindcore kind of stuff, which is very punk in spirit. It's pretty raw, and it sounds like it's recorded live. Very straightforward sounding, but there's some odd arrangements that make it kind of weird. They were doing some sci-fi stuff way before it was a cool thing to do for this kind of music. There's a bunch of little nods and inside jokes, kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of references to sci-fi stuff here. Armageddon Shop released this, and they did a really, really good job, as always. This came on Gray, I believe. Yeah, Gray Marble. This has the classified files with all the releases, with little blurbs about when they were recorded and stuff like that, but staying in kayfabe, talking about them being some kind of Area 51 kind of deal. The bass player, Devin, went on to be in Drop Dead. He was also in Monster X. The vocal approach to this sounds a lot like John from Monster X, where I had to kind of double and triple check to make sure it wasn't John under a pseudonym. But yeah, super monstrous and echoey and kind of cupping the mic sounding, but in a really cool way. Very, very cool. This also comes with... Why not? Let's unfold posters. Let's break that protocol. Very thin newspaper poster there. Exploding Corpse Action. Yeah, overall, what a cool band. What a great, great band. It's just an awesome grindcore band. I think they're better than a lot of accomplished grind bands that were around at the same time. One thing I wanted to check out, again, give a bunch more spins to... When I watched Eric's update, I listened to this a bunch of times when I first got it. That was months ago, I think right after it came out. I stocked it in the distro. I think I sold out of it. It was this Phantasm LP, Keeper of Death. This is part of that Russian reissue series that I was talking about from Nuclear War Now. Eric talked about a bunch of other releases. Check those all out. They're all great, especially the Aspid LP. This is death metal from Russia, not to be confused with the band from Milwaukee, and part of that series. And it's very cool. It's very stripped down, mid-paced, creepy, like minimalist kind of death metal. It's kind of plodding in points. They speed it up here and there, but not super often. In a lot of ways, it sounds to me like almost like if Goat Lord had their act together. I think that's funny because Eric compared Early Imprecation to Goat Lord on his update, but I'm not just cribbing from him. It is stripped down, like pounding, mid-paced, very, very bare bones death metal stuff that almost borders on that weird black metal like Samael and Goat Lord. You know, you could consider it even to be part of that too, especially because there's some moody atmospheric synths in between a few of the songs. But whatever you want to call it, it's very good death, maybe black metal stuff. What's weird is that it sounds like it's recorded in 2 different sessions, but according to this, it's not. Like the second side of the album is heavier sounding to me, more death metal sounding to me, but apparently it was all recorded at the same time. I don't know. Wild stuff was happening in Russia at that time. This was only recorded like a year or 2 after the Berlin Wall fell, so very much still, you know, living behind the shadow of the Iron Curtain there. But yeah, really good. Oh, so hot. Milk was a bad choice. This room, I need to do something about the heat vents up here or something. I'm here recording and I'm just dying under all this freaking hair. But downstairs, it's like frigid. I don't know what it is. Got imbalance. We only have a thermostat on one floor, and it makes everything. Why do you care? I'm sorry. Never mind. Anyways, we got the Hatred Surge comp here. This came out this year on Iron Lung. Horrible Mess, 2005 to 2007. Now, if you weren't around, Hatred Surge were a force of nature in the mid-2000s. There was an uptick in really non-jokey, not fun, dark, bleak, power violence, hardcore kind of stuff that kind of blew up around then. Mind Eraser were huge, Scapegoat from Boston, Running for Cover from Buffalo. This project, which at its inception was just one guy recording and playing everything with a few guest vocalists, and then he fleshed it out into a full band at some point. He's also the guy that happened to play drums in Power Trip. He's also in Mammoth Grinder and a million other bands. This was his passion project. This was his love letter to bands like Crossed Out and Despise You. Definitely the bleaker side of the power violence scene from the 90s. There's a little bit more grind involved in this too, I'd say. A little bit heavier and a little bit more intricate kind of songwriting. The tone is really burly on most of these recordings. And it includes a bunch of splits, including the split with The Endless Blockade, who from Toronto, who are also great. There was a bunch of really good bands kind of doing that at the time. I believe Weekend Nachos kind of came out of that whole era as well. But this is some of the best of the era for sure, or any era for power violence, grind stuff. There's a Despise You cover, a Disrupt cover, a Napalm Death cover, and an Agnostic Front cover. That kind of sums it all up right there. Guest vocals on one of the songs with Sean Dean from Cold Sweat, who was a terrifying human being. Great vocalist. Hatred Surge. Good stuff. Then, this little doozy right here. This is the Dawn of Orion double LP discography. You probably know Mike Seatown if you watch metal collector videos on YouTube. This is his old band from Atlanta that were around in the late 90s into the early 2000s, I think. This is metalcore when metalcore was metalcore, when it was younger kids that kind of cut their teeth in the straight edge hardcore scene usually, that started kind of absorbing a lot of influence from death metal in particular, but also black metal. Eventually, if you know how things went, a lot of bands just kind of started absorbing melodeath and throwing in breakdowns. That's when I stopped paying attention. Dawn of Orion, at the beginning of the onset of their influences, you can hear a lot of like straight up, a lot of like Tampa death metal stuff kind of seeping in, and black metal. And you can hear that at the beginnings of the sort of Slaughter of the Soul stuff influencing them, but they utilize it in a really vicious way that's not at all pretty or nice. It's really great metallic hardcore stuff from the era. If you like that stuff and you haven't heard them, I recommend you check it out. Everything was so kind of separated, and the internet wasn't as widespread when I was paying attention to stuff like this. And I was picky about it at the time, too. I actually listen to way more stuff like this now than I did in the late 90s. During that time, I was really into a lot of crust and, power violence and some straight-up punk and oi stuff. I was very picky about my metalcore, but all my friends liked it. And there was a handful of bands that I loved, like The Swarm and, like a couple of Converge tracks here and there, and Acme and from Germany. I got way more into it later. If you know me and know my channel, you've heard me babble about that before. But I wish that I was around and to experience Dawn of Orion. I wish that I knew about them at the time, because they were an excellent band. And this is a super well put together gatefold double LP put out by Immigrant Son, who I hadn't heard about in a while. I know they put out a lot of really great records back in the day, and they've been reissuing a lot of good stuff lately, including the Mortuary LP, which has this crazy huge like welded piece of metal on it. I got that too. Mortuary's awesome as well. Then I just got this. I just spun it for the first time, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because I'm pretty chuffed on it, as people from Birmingham would say. This is the second Mortuary LP, Shine of the End. Color me clueless. I had no idea they had a second LP. This came out on Iron Bonehead. I love the debut. Who doesn't? Blackened Images. This is far more technical and clean than Blackened Images, and I understand why that might be a turnoff to some people that love that debut for it being just a primal piece of classic 90s death metal from Mexico. It's not like overproduced or anything like that. It's just very accomplished. I feel like this could easily do well on Earache or Roadrunner right alongside Morbid Angel and Pestilence. It's technical, but not to the point of atheist, cynic, dizzying, jazzy technical. It's right on par with, I'd say, Morbid Angel, something that Eric Rutan might be involved with. It's not overwhelming either. It's not like a swarm of dizzying riffs. It's just very hooky, catchy, fun to listen to. Technically adept riffage, discernible death metal growls. Just like a really good, well-executed death metal record. And I didn't go out of my way to research Mortuary. I kind of assumed that they only had one record. I'm not sure why. Then finally, I was really stoked when this came out. I've been hearing about it for a while. I recognized the name. I think like a lot of people, I assumed that this band didn't sound like they did because of the name. It's Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid Kids. This got reissued by Dark Descent not that long ago, 2 or 3 months ago, towards the end of the year. I think there were a few delays, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe Matt was just out there, getting everybody excited well in advance. I know that there was pre-orders out for a long time. Regardless, it was definitely worth the wait. This was a band from Michigan. This came out way back in '86, and I could see why a death metal historian would get really excited about something like this that sounded like this does in that year. You go back to '86, that's the same year that Horrified came out. Death, Scream, Bloody Gore was being recorded, I think then. You got Seven Churches. This isn't death metal, but there's a lot of the prime components that went into influencing death metal. I'd say it's about as proto-death as Master's early stuff was, or Deathstrike, and in a lot of ways it does remind me of Master and Deathstrike. Also Dream Death from Pittsburgh. There's some gloomy, almost doomish elements when they're going slow. There's definitely a strong kind of dirgy Celtic Frost approach to the riffing. When they go fast, it's got, like a Hell Awaits Slayer sort of thing going on. There's a lot of Slayer all over it, particularly vocally. Has that in common with Dream Death. Kind of a, sort of a socio-political bent to some of the lyrics, which I always appreciate. Early versions of blast beats, too, on one song that I was able to pick out. Like, just a gem of a release. And they had an album that came out in '89. I think I need to hear it. I don't know if they went commercial thrash or something like that, or I haven't listened to it yet. I'm probably going to go on YouTube and track it down if it's available right after I finish recording this, because I'm super curious now. But yeah, if you dig early proto, stuff that influenced death metal that wasn't quite there yet, Master, Deathstrike, Dream Death, not so much Repulsion, because they were leaning in more of a grindcore direction, but the more metal side of the early death metal stuff, I'd say Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid Kids. If you like hardcore and crossover, this would probably take care of you too. Celtic Frost as well. And also, that title, trust me. That's great. Let's head on down to Guyana. All right, that should do it for now. I finally wrapped all this up. Couldn't be happier. Glad it's done. I actually set out my mind to accomplish something in terms of my content and did it. Go me. Have a good one, everybody.